let's start this way, that, see, pragmatism is certainly rooted in a longer tradition of appeals to experience. There's no doubt about that. The original genius of pragmatism, Charles Sanders Peirce, who was very much a Kantian, was still obsessed with the question of how you can wrestle with trying to discern the condition for the possible experience without appealing solely to experience and accepting certain Kantian formulations and not accepting certain Kantian answers. Dewey was very much coming out of the Hegelian tradition. Of course, and Hegel is just preoccupied and obsessed with various forms of experience, just trying to discern the necessary and the universal patterns that somehow allow him to hold on to Vernunft, hold on to some concept of the reason, capital R, that goes beyond Verstand of understanding. But then William James is coming out of the British empiricist tradition. He dedicates his pragmatism to John Stuart Mill. But all three are preoccupied with experience and appeals to experience. Now, one of the fundamental differences between myself and those three giants and geniuses, and I'm neither giant nor genius, but I'm glad to be in conversation with the brothers, we're all New Worlders. But you see, I come from the underside of the modern experience, which means that I begin with not just catastrophe, but with the steady ache of misery without allowing catastrophe or misery to have the last word. So it doesn't mean that, by being a victim, somehow I've got access to the truth. Not at all. But it does mean that 244 years of slavery, another 100 years of neo-slavery, having folk in the family lynched and so forth, I'm going to look at my experiences and through a certain set of lens that accent not problems or what Dewey would call problematic situations, but I'm beginning with catastrophe. So I'm a blues man, and the blues is obsessed with catastrophe lyrically expressed. That's what it is. And it's the tragic comic mode, whereas Dewey hardly has a conception of the tragic. James has a rich conception of the tragic. Peirce has hardly any as well. And the tragic comic is just much, much too dark. That's where I'm with Kafka, with Beckett, with Chekhov, with Paul Celan. I mean, there's a whole rich tradition of these great, great thinkers preoccupied with catastrophe, and they all have their different roads and ways of wrestling with it and having their own experiences of it and so on. And so I've always considered myself a part of the small inhabitant of the room in the house of pragmatism. William James' wonderful metaphor. Pragmatism is a big house, and you got these different rooms and so forth. And I'm certainly have my room, but the room that I have has a big picture of Dostoevsky in there. You see, it's got a big picture of John Coltrane in there. It's got a huge picture of Chekhov. Now, most of those folk not gonna have those pictures in there because they don't resonate at all. I might have the music of the first movement of Beethoven's Opus 131, the saddest music in the history of classical music. Not just because I love Ludwig, but because it speaks deeply to my blues soul. And then by the seventh movement, he's still emerging with power on his way to death and wrestling with the near suicide of Carl, his nephew, who's on his way to the army. So in that sense, I want to be kind of clear and honest about my relation because I learned much from it, but I have my own lens through which I view it.